Welcome back to Phrase in Focus, the show where we dive deep into the words of independent and up-and-coming filmmakers. The people pushing boundaries, telling untold stories, and making movies that stay with you long after the credits roll. I'm your host, Minh Thao, and today we're going somewhere we haven't been before. Deep into the streets of Vietnam, where two very different lives collide in the shadow of one of the world's darkest crimes. My guest today is Quoc Hung, the director behind Dien Sin. It's a gripping, emotionally charged film set in Vietnam. Following two interviewed narratives, Tuan, a police detective determined to dismantle an international human trafficking chain, and Ling, a single mother who's searching for a better life leads her into a dangerous trap. It's a film that blends crime thriller tension with an unflinching look at social realities, and it's one that lingers in your mind long after it ends. Quoc Hung, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
For listeners who might be hearing about Dien Sin for the first time, can you give us a snapshot of what it's about and maybe share what first sparked the idea for the story?
The film follows two main characters, Tuấn, a morally driven detective, and Ling, a single mother whose life had been full of hardships. One day, Ling finds a flyer advertising for overseas work that she believes will change her life, but it's actually part of a human trafficking scheme. The two stories eventually converge as Tuấn works to stop the trafficking chain and rescue Ling. I wanted to shed light on an issue that's rarely discussed openly in Vietnam.
I know Dien Sin didn't start out with the exact story we see on the screen today. In fact, you had a completely different narrative in mind at the beginning. Can you walk us through what the original concept was, how it shifted over time, and what ultimately led you to reframe it around such an urgent social issue?
The story actually started out very differently. At first, it was about an investigator father and his son who was secretly involved in the crime he was investigating. But the tension came from the father slowly uncovering the truth about his own son. But as we continued developing the script, we realized we wanted the story to reflect something more urgent, something rooted in the real social issues here in Vietnam. So we reworked the narrative to focus on human trafficking, which is a topic that's often ignored. From there, we put a lot more thought into our characters. Tuấn became this morally driven investigator. And Ling, she's not just a victim. She's a person with hopes, fears, and has a real sense of struggle. We wanted both of them to feel emotionally layered and human.
This isn't your first film, of course. Your debut project was Hush. Looking back now, how would you compare the two? And how did the lessons from Hush shape the way you approach the dancing?
With Hush, it was my debut project, and there were a lot of aspects that needed improvement. The coherence between scenes wasn't always there, the lighting wasn't consistent, and the camera work was unstable. With The Unseen, it was a much more refined production. We had stronger planning and scripting from the very beginning, and that made a big difference. There was greater investment in lighting, visuals, and sound. The visuals especially draws the audience into the film's environment. I think that connection really helps them immerse themselves in the narrative.
Not every filmmaker gets the luxury of full credit for them, especially on a project as ambitious as Dien Sin. You and your team were able to oversee the entire production without much pushback, which is rare in this industry. Can you talk about what the level of control meant for you, and like how it influenced your choices during filming, the way you shaped your story, and even the way you guided the team creatively from start to finish?
Our team had a lot of creative freedom on our hands, and so this let us oversee the whole production process of the film, which we were able to push the product through its production stages without much resistance. Having the creative freedom on our hands led us to create a story that was truly authentic and meaningful.
You had the vision of using a lot of close-up shots to build momentum and tension. I'd love to hear about how that idea carried through to the actual shoot. Were those close-ups as effective and sad as they were in your head?
When writing the film, I pictured a lot of close ups. It's such a powerful way to draw the audience into a character's emotions. I think it really came through in the final cut. Those tight frames let you feel every single tension, especially in moments where words weren't even needed.
Let's talk about location and lighting. Because one scene that really stood out to me was the one with Ling in the alleyway. It has this moody, gritty atmosphere, but I know it came with some real challenges. Can you describe the lighting situation there and how you adapted to make it work visually?
The alleyway was naturally very dark, which made it tricky to capture the emotion I wanted. We end up using portable LED lights to give it just enough brightness without losing that moody feel. It was definitely a compromise, but I think it worked for the tone we were going for.
Of course, location isn't the only unpredictable element on set. The weather can throw you curveballs too. I heard you had one shoot day where heavy rain changed your plans completely. What happened and how did you handle it?
Oh, it was chaos. We didn't expect to encounter the heavy rain, so we had to adapt really fast. It made the execution feel more rushed, but it also forced us to make quick and creative decisions. Surprisingly, some shots turned out even better than expected. I even had to step in and act out at one point, while still directing Ling Chi, our lead actress. It was a juggling act, but it made the shoot feel more collaborative.
Post production often feels like a whole new version of filmmaking. Scenes get cut, reshot, restructured. When you look at the end scene, were there any major changes during editing that really defined the final film?
There were a lot of shots and parts of the story that didn't make the final cut because they just didn't flow well with the rest of the film. We had to refine and restructure it quite a bit to make sure everything felt connected. Some scenes were even refilmed multiple times until they really worked and delivered the meaning we wanted. It was a long process, but it helped make the final version feel more purposeful.
I also want to touch on something technical but important, the audio. You had an issue with one key dialogue scene between Duan and Nam. How did you solve it and what did that teach you?
We originally recorded that dialogue with a shotgun mic mounted on the camera, but because of the camera's position, the audio came out teeny and full of white noise. It just wasn't usable. So we re-recorded the whole thing, and I brought it into Adobe Audition to make it sound more natural. Like Nam was really speaking through the speaker. It was frustrating, of course, but it taught me so much about sound design and the importance of clean audio.
Looking at the editing process more broadly, when you compare Hush and the Unseen, what are the biggest technical and creative improvements you see in your work?
In Hush, I didn't realize how much continuity and pacing could affect the audience experience. Characters would switch sides in the frame, and the pacing was too fast. There was no color grading either, so it lacked a visual identity. With The Unseen, I worked hard on the pacing and the color grading to give it a consistent experience for the viewer.
And your own editing skills. I imagine they've evolved a lot since your debut. How confident do you feel now compared to back then?
Definitely, I've become much faster and more confident in Premiere Pro and After Effects. When I first used After Effects on Hush, there were a lot of small imperfections I didn't even notice. Editing took a long time too, as I was still a beginner at the time and was still developing my skills.
Before we wrap up, for other indie filmmakers listening right now who are about to start their first big project, what's one piece of advice you'd give them?
Having a clear vision is important, but stay flexible. Preparation is good, but so is the ability to adapt when something inevitably goes wrong.
Rahul, thank you so much for sharing the journey of the Unseen with us.
Thank you. It's been great talking about it.
That's all for this episode of Frames in Focus. Next week, we're diving into another bold indie feature you won't want to miss.